Good morning. Thanks, Mike. That was great as always. So in the 2 weeks that we've been apart, we've seen an announcement from the Biden administration about vaccine mandates. And so that's really the topic for today. If you come to the legal update tomorrow, I'm going to do a deeper dive into some of the COVID stuff. But that's mostly what I'm focusing on today. So if you've been coming to these town halls, you've seen this slide before, but I think it's always good to get a base, especially for folks who might be new. The overriding question, of course, is can employers require the COVID vaccine? And basically, ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, tells us employers can establish legitimate health and safety requirements that are job related and consistent with business necessity. So what does that mean? That means if you have all of your employees working from home, chances are you're going to have a hard time mandating the vaccine unless there's a government mandate. But if you just want to do it privately and you've got all your folks working from home, you're going to have a hard argument that there's a business necessity for having a vaccine mandate, unless of course you send them out to clients and customers, and those clients and customers are saying, well, yeah, we want your employees to be vaccinated. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, sort of the customer client demands. But that's a question we're getting a lot at MEA. What if we've got customers who say, I won't take anybody on site unless they're vaccinated? Of course, in any vaccine mandate policy, you're going to have to allow under the Americans with Disabilities Act for reasonable accommodation on the basis of medical reasons. And under Title VII, you're going to have to allow for accommodation on the basis of religion. That does not mean that automatically if someone asks for an accommodation, they get it. It means you have to engage in an interactive process and you have to figure out, can I reasonably accommodate this person? Does it cause an undue hardship? Does it cause a direct threat to the rest of my workforce? And that's an analysis that I suggest you go through, certainly at least with an experienced HR person and preferably with an employment attorney. Note that the lawsuits so far have gone in favor of employers. The biggest one we talked about a few months ago was a large hospital system in Houston. They said everybody's got to get vaccinated. I think out of about 20,000 employees, they had less than 80 holdouts. And some of those folks sued and they ended up losing. Although I understand that the case has not been dropped and they are pursuing their appeals. They're pursuing some state remedies, so stay tuned. But I think for the most part, certainly in a healthcare setting, you're not going to see employees win this one. There has been a pretty long history of employers being able to mandate vaccines if it's for health and safety reasons. But stay tuned, you don't know. And what you guys have always heard me say is, as a smaller or to mid-sized employer, you probably don't want to take on that fight if you don't have to. Let the big boys, let a 20,000 employee hospital system do that, let Amazon do that, let Apple do that, and you just await the results. And of course, the impact of full FDA approval. We now have full FDA approval of the Pfizer vaccine, and I think that does make a difference. I think it takes away some of the arguments that people have had around, taking a vaccine that was supposedly untested and unapproved. I think it takes away some of those arguments. So as Mike said, carrots and sticks. I like this one. I like talking about carrots and sticks. And I'm going to bring Mike back for this just a little bit of this discussion, although Mike is more than welcome to chime in at any point. But obviously, if you don't have a government mandate, if you're not in one of those categories and you want to mandate the vaccine, you have to be prepared for the question of, what's going to happen when your employees refuse. I've been talking to a member who did implement a vaccine mandate. They've got about 80% of their employees vaccinated. Are they prepared to let folks walk who haven't been vaccinated? So if you can't answer that question, don't impose the vaccine mandate, of course, outside of a government requirement. But it is something to think about, especially as we saw in the video, how hard it is right now to recruit and to retain. Are we really prepared to let people walk? I was actually talking to a business owner this weekend. Her family owns a restaurant and she owns a catering company. And she says she's actually scared to ask her employees how many of them are vaccinated because she doesn't really want to know the answer. Now, I think she's taking some health and safety risks there, absolutely, but she's concerned about her ability to keep and to recruit new people because she's got events coming up, every weekend, and she needs to be able to staff that wedding and she needs to be able to staff that banquet. And she's afraid if she imposes a vaccine mandate, she's not going to be able to do that. So her solution is everybody's masked. Doesn't matter if you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, everybody's masked, but it is something to think about. We do, again, you've got the potential for legal challenges, workers' comp challenges. And I know Mike had some thoughts on that, and also about that whole idea of what about your employees or your customers and your clients demanding that your employees be vaccinated. So Mike, I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, just one preliminary thought as well is that I've started to run into situations among my clients where some businesses are losing employees because they have not implemented a vaccine mandate. And employees who are afraid of contracting the Delta variant, and Lord knows what further variants are down the line, are saying, I don't want to work here because all of the reports tell me that even though I'm vaccinated, I can still get the Delta variant. I don't think it's right that you're having me report to the workplace and exposing me to people who are unvaccinated and thereby increasing my health risk. So the pendulum is swinging both ways with respect to this. I get a lot of questions, of course, from businesses who say, well, if I do mandate the vaccine and there is something wrong with the vaccine, or somebody gets sick or has some side effect from the vaccine, am I liable for that? The answer to the question is that while nobody really knows what the answer is because it hasn't had an opportunity to work its way through the court system yet, I feel fairly confident in what I'm about to say. There will always be outliers. There are judges who will go off on a tangent, and it ultimately comes back to where it should be. But I think this is a fair statement of the law as best as I can conceive of it now. Number one, if you require an employee as a condition of that employee's employment to do something like get a vaccination, and that something that you do causes some harm to the employee, that's covered by workers' compensation. That's a condition of employment, and that's why you have workers' compensation insurance. Number two, let's suppose you're outside of workers' compensation in some respect. Let's suppose a court's rule that it's not covered by workers' compensation. Here's my advice with respect to that. Number one, if you're going to mandate vaccinations, don't you have your personnel administer the vaccinations to employees. Have a third party do it, either offsite or you can do it on site, but make sure that a third party is administering the vaccinations, because then you are not in the position of being the supplier of the product, the vaccination that supposedly caused somebody harm. If they could prove it, some third party is supplying the vaccination. And in that instance, the only basis upon which you could possibly be liable is if you were negligent in requiring people to get vaccines. And it would be, in my judgment, impossible, and I use that word advisedly, to charge someone with negligence for mandating vaccines when the FDA has approved it, when the President of the United States is mandating it for federal employees, et cetera, as Amy talked about. There's no negligence there. Even if something were to happen, it wouldn't be because you as the employer were negligent. There is, as Amy mentioned, potential ADA, religious discrimination issues, which is another topic for another time. But the third point I want to make here is suppose you don't mandate the vaccination, what are your potential liabilities? In a situation, as Amy referenced, where, for example, you have third parties and you're sending salespeople out or workers out to a work site and they're unvaccinated and somebody claims that they got COVID as a result of your having sent out unvaccinated people to their workplaces. That's a real issue. And I expect that, frankly, to be a greater risk as the months roll by than the risks associated with mandating vaccinations. I think the not mandating vaccinations has real potential for litigation as we go on.
Great. Thanks, Mike. I think no matter what you decide to do, if you're going to mandate the vaccine or you're simply going to encourage it, I would implement a policy. We do have, for members, we've got sample policies for voluntary and mandation of the vaccine on member tools, so you can access those. I think you just need your employees to know that you're thinking about it and it's important to you. And also you can give them information about how to get a vaccine. Think about whether you want to do a vaccine clinic on site. As Mike said, you don't want to be giving the vaccine yourself, but you could bring in one of the pharmacy chains and they'd be happy to do that for you, as long as you have a threshold number of people who need the vaccine. So more carrots and sticks. We're seeing it, more and more with the state and local governments. Philadelphia and New Jersey have both implemented mandates for some workers, mostly healthcare workers, education workers. Federal government's requiring both its employees and contractors to either be vaccinated or undergo testing. And if you're unvaccinated, you're going to be required to socially distance, to wear masks, and not be permitted to travel. for work. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about travel mandates tomorrow, by the way, on what you should be doing around employee travel. And of course, President Biden has ordered the Department of Health and Human Services to require nursing homes to have vaccinated staff to get Medicare and Medicaid funds. So another way that trying to encourage vaccination. And then, of course, we're seeing it a lot in the private sector. I've just was talking to someone in big pharma. So all the big pharma companies have now put in a vaccine mandate. Makes sense, right? Especially your J&J, your Moderna, your Pfizer, you're making the vaccines. You probably want your employees to get the vaccines. We're also seeing it in tech. We're seeing it on Wall Street. Some of it is just mandating the vaccine to come on site. Some of it is mandating the vaccine for everyone. We're seeing it in transportation. Amtrak has a vaccine mandate. Several of the airlines have a vaccine mandate. And also, one of the strategies that some employers are using is we may not mandate the vaccine for our current employees, but we're going to mandate it for everybody we hire going forward. We don't want to lose our good current employees because we know we have a couple of folks who are obstinate and are not going to get the vaccine, but going forward, we are going to mandate the vaccine. And so Ladders, they're a website you're probably familiar with that posts sort of high-end jobs. They did a study and they looked at many, I think in the millions of job postings, and 5,000% increase in job postings listing vaccination as a requirement since January of 2021. So more and more employers are doing it. If they're not doing it for their current employees, they're doing it for their future employees. And we've gotten a lot of questions about what Delta is doing around their health care surcharge. They're adding a $200 a month healthcare surcharge. Keep in mind, Delta is a large company. My guess is that they're self-insured, so they have a lot more flexibility to do this. So this is a conversation that most employers are going to need to have with their broker, with their insurance carrier. But there are legal issues around this too. There are HIPAA issues, which prohibit employers from charging employees different premiums based on a health factor, with an exception for a wellness program, like a smoking cessation program. There could be issues under the Affordable Care Act, affordability and surcharge limits. So definitely, if this is something you're thinking about, talk to your carrier and talk to an ERISA attorney. There are benefits attorneys out there. This is all they do. And I only know enough about ERISA to be dangerous. So I unfortunately am not the right person to talk to about that. But if you did want to talk to somebody, I can certainly refer you to some folks. And of course, the big stick. September 9th, 2021, President Biden announced his new COVID action plan. And one of the big requirements is that the plan is going to include that all employers with employees of 100 or more ensure that their workers are vaccinated or tested weekly. Currently, where this stands is that the plan has directed the Department of Labor, has directed OSHA to develop an emergency temporary standard to implement the requirement. OSHA presumably is working on that ETS, but we don't have it yet. The White House anticipates the requirement will apply to over 80 million private sector workers, and it really remains to be seen how the ETS will be worded and implemented, and exactly when this is going to happen is not clear either. I think one of the key questions is, with all this potential testing involved, who's going to pay for the testing? EEOC has already taken the position well before this plan came out. EEOC takes the position that medical testing that's mandated by an employer needs to be paid for by the employer, but it's really not clear what's going to happen here, because some of this may not be covered by insurance, and if it's not, depending on which type of test you use, those tests can run, somewhere in the $75 to $100 range per pop. So that could get very expensive very quickly. My guess is that the testing companies are going to come out with sort of bundles, sort of deals around this, but who knows? It remains to be seen exactly what's going to happen. I also have a concern. You remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we had a testing shortage. What happens when there's all of a sudden a run on tests? So many questions remain to be answered. One of the questions we've gotten from some members is, we have 120 employees, but 100 of them work from home. Do you think that we'll still have to have a vaccine mandate? My guess is yes. I don't think that the government's going to parse this out like that, but who knows? Kind of remains to be seen. So what can you do to prepare? Well, take a look at there's a lot of information out there. We did put an alert out, MEA put an alert out on the mandates, on the new Biden plan, and I think there is a link in there to the actual plan. So take a look at it. Take a look at our alert. Take a look at the plan. Determine all this. Already might you be covered by that mandate, or really any of the mandates. I think it's important to determine what percentage of your population is vaccinated, and then to develop a communication or a plan around this, so you can determine sort of what to do. And you are allowed to ask folks if they are vaccinated. I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow. And you've probably, if you've been on these town halls, you've heard me talk about it before. You can ask, have you been vaccinated? But you don't ask the follow-up questions. You don't ask, why not? You don't ask any of that. But I think it's important to kind of know what your percentage is, to know what your risk is, so you can assess going forward what you might be faced with regard to any of these mandates. So happy, I know there's some questions coming in. Hopefully Kevin can get back on and help me with those. Obviously, if you have future town hall topics, please let us know. But let's talk some questions.
Yep, we do. We got quite a few. And again, as we talk about, very dynamic space, so we'll do what we can as of today. So someone said, if you do someone requests an accommodation, can you require that they be tested on a weekly basis? Which I think is yes. The next part of which you just answered is, and does the employer have to pay for that?
Yeah, we don't know the answer to the pay yet. But yes, what you can do if someone requests a reasonable accommodation, I don't want to get a vaccine because of a religious reason or a medical reason, or I can't for a medical reason. One of the things the employer needs to think about is, what else can I do to accommodate? Can I have that person wear a mask? Can I socially isolate that person? Can I have that person work from home? Can I test that person twice a week? Is that a sufficient, reasonable accommodation? So all things to think about as you're going through the process.
So one thing that I would add is that the whole religious issue is starting to get highlighted. I mean, the ADA is a little bit more established, although we're in a new context, but all the leaders of virtually all the major religions, the Pope, have all endorsed the vaccine, and people are coming forward now who don't want to get vaccinated and using as an excuse, well, that's against my religion. Courts are looking at that pretty closely, and I saw yesterday for the first time a decision by a court which turned down an employee's claim that it violated sincerely held religious beliefs, and said that it was really a manufactured excuse by the employee. So it's a much tougher burden for the employee to bear if the employee just raises his or her hand and says, I've got a religious objection, and you have a right to take a close look at that.
Yeah, and that's when it's going to be fought in the courts. There's also, I did see a Delaware County Court of Common Pleas judge rejected a religious accommodation request for a student at a private school. I didn't see which school. So, so I agree with you, Mike. I think those are tougher roads to hoe for the employer.
Okay,
for the employee, rather.
Yep, this is a little bit future looking, but if a company, let's say a company requires vaccinations for employees, do they have to require it for the booster, or can they have the discretion? And putting aside what the federal government's going to do, because I think let's deal with the first one there. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I think if you're going to mandate the vaccine, you want to mandate whatever the CDC recommends. My sort of party line on this has been, as an employer, you have a requirement to provide a safe workplace. And one of the ways to make sure that you're doing the best you can, is to follow CDC requirements. So if CDC ultimately says boosters, I think we would want to, as an employer, mandate those as well. But Mike, if you have different thoughts.
No, I've done. I mean, if the question was, does the employer have the freedom to say, you don't have to get boosters? Yeah, the employer has the freedom to do that, unless the OSHA regulation comes down otherwise. But I don't know why you would mandate vaccinations and then not mandate boosters as well. What would be the point?
And I did see something this morning that they have looked at the efficacy of 2 J&J shots now, and it's much more effective with 2 J&J shots. So for those of you who got the J&J vaccine, stay tuned. They may come out with a recommendation for a booster on that as well.
And someone, I think, a couple of questions around how you count to the 100. Someone said, do owners and management count? Management, clearly they're employees. I guess owners, if they're not employees, again, without knowing what the rules say at this point. And then what if you have employees that are outside the US, it would get you to 100. So if you have 80 US employees, but 30 that are outside the country.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't know yet. We don't know what OSHA is going to say.
Yeah, the last, I've heard estimates that OSHA is going to take could take 30 to 60 days to come up with this regulation. So goodness knows what it's going to say.
Yeah, and there is a part of me that thinks that this we might be hearkening back a little bit to the Obama FLSA regulations. What was that, 2016, where employers start. And I think one of the reasons that Biden did this, and one of the reasons there is a lag, is because Biden just wants a lot of private employers to start doing it without the reg coming out. And then the reg comes out and then it gets challenged and who knows what's going to happen. So there is a lot of stay tuned here. We just don't know.
Okay, someone asked, a couple of people said, do you know of any companies that can help with testing? I'm aware of one that does on-site testing, which is a company called Wellness Coaches. There are probably more. If anybody can type in the chat any companies that are aware of that comes on site to do testing, that would be great. You know, Amy did talk about the vaccine, so that's a little bit easier, but the testing.
My guess is that all the testing companies are going to be getting their information out there pretty quickly to take advantage of this.
Yeah. Okay, let's see.
So one of the issues here is also that's going to have to be clarified is what about the self-administered rapid tests, which are notoriously unreliable? Is that going to, or should that?
Well, that's actually not true, Mike. One of our members is one of the clinical lab standards, and it's the validity of those is still pretty high. It's over 90%. However, it's the cost issue because they're right now not covered by the kind of the coverage of the others. So
my understanding, testing is great. It's whether or not you give it to an employer and say go in this room and do it. Do they do it correctly?
Yeah.
Unless they're supervised. But other than that, it's great. Yeah, it's gotten much more efficacious when properly handled.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a trust involved with employees there, but that's
there
okay.
is.
So someone asked them, their understanding was President Biden's executive order was that federal employees and contractors have to be vaccinated with no testing out. Is that correct?
I think there's a testing
for contractors. Is there a testing out?
I thought there was a testing option to that one. But I have to admit, I'm getting confused with all the different.
I believe there is for federal contractors, but there is not for federal employees.
Okay, we'll double check that, and if there's a difference, we'll kind of put it in the email out afterwards. I think we already answered the question. You can ask candidates if they're vaccinated, and you can make that a condition of a job.
Yep.
And somebody asked, can you refuse to hire on the basis of I'm not vaccinated if you have a mandatory vaccination policy and you're interviewing somebody and they say, we're not vaccinated, I'm not going to get vaccinated. Yes, you can refuse to hire that person on that basis. ADA, et cetera, factoring in.
And also keep in mind, there are a handful of states where it's a much bigger question as to whether or not you can ask about vaccines. So if you have employees in Texas or Florida or some of those other states, I would seek local counsel on that. But yeah, for the most part, certainly if you're in the Northeast, you can ask all these questions.
And Hilda put in that they currently use Parkway clinical labs for on-site testing. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's it. So a lot of stuff going on. As always, the reason we're holding these every week is because every week something's new or something's changing. So hope you continue to join us. And I know a number of people have signed up for the employment law update for tomorrow. That's like Amy said, it's a deeper dive in a lot of these topics. So hope you'll be able to join our folks then as well. Have a great week, everyone, and we will see you soon. Take care.
See you tomorrow.
Yeah.